The following podcast is a deep, shallow dive production.
Okay, let's go.
The spike protein is proven in 3,400 peer-reviewed manuscripts to cause four major domains of disease. One is cardiovascular disease, heart inflammation, or myocarditis. Every regulatory agency agrees the vaccines cause myocarditis. I'm a cardiologist. Before COVID, for years, we've had guidelines in cardiology. When there is myocarditis, whether it's symptomatic or not, people cannot exert themselves in athletics. It will cause a cardiac arrest. And yet across Europe and across the United States, sports leagues were injecting young people who had no medical necessity, no clinical indication with these vaccines. And we have seen a montage of cardiac arrests in young individuals. I'm telling you as an expert cardiologist, these cardiac arrests are due to the COVID-19 vaccine until proven otherwise. They are. Other cardiovascular diseases caused by the vaccine proven. Acceleration of atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease and heart attacks or cardiovascular arrest. Posterior orthostatic tachycardia syndrome or POTS, or people passing out due to low blood pressure. You have seen montages of people in the media, one after another, passing out like you've never seen before. It is the vaccine until proven otherwise.
Hey everybody, happy Tuesday. I hope you had a great weekend, and sorry for not being able to get a episode out yesterday. Unfortunately, I attended a funeral, kind of a very sudden funeral, and I wanted to start this episode off with that little minute and a half from Dr. Peter McCullough. He is a internationally renowned cardiologist, and I'm not going to get too much into this today, and I am definitely not trying to be controversial by any means, but I will tell you, this was the fourth friend of mine that is in my age range, so let's say 45 to 55, that passed away very suddenly. This one also on a treadmill. I had a similar situation, which I talked about in episode, or I referenced in episode number 2. But again, super healthy guy. I mean, God, I don't want to say about as fit as you can get, but pretty damn fit, actually. And yeah, had a cardiac episode getting off of a treadmill, right off of a treadmill. And unfortunately, nobody was around and he passed away. So anyway, like I said, I am not trying to stir the hornet's nest on this, but I did think that was worth a listen from Dr. Peter McCullough. And if this is something that you're interested in talking more about, please feel free to reach out to me individually. Again, if we know each other, you know how to get a hold of me. If we don't, feel free to send an email to deepshallowdive@gmail.com. You can also find a contact us on deepshallowdive.com, or again, any of the social media platforms. Obviously, you can just go there to the Deep Shallow Dive page on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, anywhere, and send us a message there, and I will definitely get back to you. But like I said, I think it's something that everyone needs to take their own health in their own hands and be cognizant of it. But I will tell you, based off of my own personal research, due to the issues with, again, friends of mine having this situation happen, I will say it's happening a lot. And gosh, maybe even of somebody, for those of you listening, maybe of somebody where this maybe took place for. And a lot of it is happening when there's an increased level of exertion. And, the concept of myocarditis is really inflammation of the heart. And when the heart muscle inflames, it just is not able to beat properly and then also contract properly, expand and contract properly. And then that leads to a host of different, potential cardiac cardiac arrest situations. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of put that on everybody's radar. Again, I am not trying to judge one way or the other the opinions of the previous clip or the opinions of Dr. Peter McCullough. Those are not the opinions of myself or the Deep Shallow Dive, but I did think that was worth a listen. And like I've said before, when it comes to every take, and I think I posted this on Instagram over the weekend after posting a few different clips, which I'm actually might even play today. I treat everything I hear as an individual piece of information that I'm hearing. And, the example I gave is, and I will play this a little bit later, but, there was a great clip. Bernie Sanders came out and gave his thoughts on the need for a ceasefire. And then also MSNBC contributor Joy Reid came out and talked about something. Barack Obama came out and talked about something. And I'll be super transparent. Neither Bernie Sanders, Joy Reid, or even Obama are people that I normally agree with. And that's calling a spade a spade. Maybe the Bernie and Joy doesn't surprise you. Maybe the Obama part surprises you. But again, I'm being very honest about that. For the most part, I could say a lot of stuff they say I don't agree with. But they each came out with individual clips, which I will play later. And you know what? I agreed with their clips. I agreed with those takes. Now, they may come out with a clip or a take tomorrow on the same topic or a different topic, and maybe I don't agree with that. And so, that's okay, because what I'm seeing happening is, for example, you post something from Obama or post something from Trump for that matter. And if you love Trump, you agree with everything he says, or Obama, you agree with everything he says. If you hate that person, you naturally will disagree with everything that person says. Whereas, I don't think you should look at it like that. I really don't. I think you should judge the take for the take. And you might agree with Obama or Trump or Bernie Sanders or Joy Reid or whomever. You might agree with them 5 times. You might disagree with them 5 times. And that's totally okay. Heck, you might agree with me 5 times. You might disagree with me 5 times. And that's totally okay. I think that any person that, God, you're not going to agree with what anyone says all the time. And so if someone, again, for example, in the Bernie Sanders clip, Bernie Sanders is not somebody that I normally agree with. But when he said what he said, I was like, hey, that makes a lot of sense to me. Therefore, I'm going to support that take and I'm going to post it. I'm not supporting Bernie Sanders and everything that he stands for politically, but that specific take I am supporting. So anyway, wanted to start off with that. And now, actually, I did want to talk a little bit more about the military-industrial complex stuff that we started in the back half of episode 48, because again, I do think that, having a handle on the military-industrial complex, the petrodollar, central bank digital currency, these 3 topics really are something that I always keep in the back of my mind, and I always kind of try and analyze what's going on with those 3 things in my mind. And really what I mean is, when you think about the military-industrial complex, think about the concept of, forever wars. And, war is a business. War is a business. No different than, and I hate to say it, medicine is a business. There's a great quote I heard. It was years ago. I think it was on one of those food-related documentaries that got really hot back in like 2013, 2014. Actually, back when Ray D was a everyday juicer, and I juiced the heck out of fresh vegetables on a daily basis. And all I talked about was juicing fresh vegetables. I think a lot of you, if we were friends back then, you'll probably remember and be like, oh my God, thank God he stopped talking about juicing vegetables because that dude was consumed. But I think it was in the documentary Food Matters or Food Inc. And it basically said good health makes a lot of sense, but it doesn't make a lot of dollars. And obviously, there it's a play on words with the word sense, as in CENTS versus SENSE. So good health makes a lot of quote unquote sense, but it doesn't make a lot of dollars. And that's a great quote. I love that. And, I think you could apply that to the military industrial complex. And I think you can apply that to the concept of, forever wars and wars. Peace makes a lot of sense, but it doesn't make a lot of dollars. So, think about that. Peace makes a lot of sense, but it doesn't make a lot of dollars. That to me, those two industries, so to speak, military, war, and then health and medicine, they are businesses. They are businesses among everything else that they are businesses. So let's start off with this clip. It's a little bit of a continuation on what we talked about in terms of Afghanistan and Iraq. And again, remember, after 9/11, it was actually, this is actually a good thing to remember too. Remember George W. Bush? I mean, everybody hated that guy. He was a clown. He was a complete clown. Like, honestly, as far as presidents go, really until Trump, I can't remember a president that was as much ridiculed and mocked as George W. Bush. I mean, he really was. And then 9/11 happens, the towers fall down, and basically a sense of nationalism takes over. And all of a sudden, whether you loved Bush or hated him, and very few people loved him, Bush was the guy. Bush was the guy. He had everybody's support. He had everybody's attention. Ironically, that's kind of what's happened in Israel with Netanyahu. We're going to talk a little bit more about Netanyahu, but if you remember in, I think, episode 35 or 36, maybe 37, I talked about the tremendous civil unrest that was happening in Israel in terms of the judicial reforms that Netanyahu was trying to implement. And as recent as September of this year, remember I played that 60 Minutes clip where Leslie Stahl went over to Israel and she basically was interviewing the former military members who now were pretty much revolting against Netanyahu because they absolutely were wanting to reject his attempt at judicial reform. And that attempt at judicial reform by Netanyahu would have consolidated much more power into the executive branch, into Netanyahu's hands. And so Israel was on the brink of civil war. Charlie Kirk talked about it in that clip. We've had other people mention it. Like I said, the 60 Minutes piece was all about that. If you go back and Google Israel judicial reform, oh my God, you'll find article after article after article. But then it all stopped October 7th. October 7th happened, Hamas's horrific attack on Israel that morning, that Saturday morning, and basically everything stopped in terms of that judicial reform, or really anything. And now all of a sudden, Netanyahu, very similar to George W. back in 2001, all of a sudden he had a crazy amount more power, because I think there's like wartime presidential or prime minister elections not elections, but he can invoke certain powers. And then besides that, it's like you're not going to go out there and protest judicial reform when your country just got attacked. So basically all of those all of that uprising was pretty much, I don't want to say it was squashed, but it definitely was put on hold. It's like a big pause button was pressed on that. So anyway, all of this stuff kind of does tie together. So let's give a listen to this first clip. This is, I spliced together a couple pieces from George Stephanopoulos. That's a tough Greek name right there. And Glenn Beck. Here's another guy, by the way, Glenn Beck. I don't really like a lot of the stuff, especially a lot of the stuff he's been saying lately, but, can't say I've been a tremendous fan of that dude. But what he talks about in this clip where he's talking about the forever wars, again, it's a good take. So let's just judge it on, that specific take. So give this all a listen.
This historic moment, the last U.S. troops have withdrawn from Afghanistan, ending America's longest war. With the Taliban we pushed out in 2001 back in control of that country again.
20 years of conflict lined a whole lot of pockets and bankrolled the elections of a whole lot of politicians. There is no way that money tree is just going to be allowed to just die off. And, wouldn't you know it, another forever war instantly popped up in Ukraine. Now, look at these dollar signs, adjusted for inflation from 1965 until today. Afghanistan, $2.3 trillion. Iraq and Syria, $2.8 trillion. The 20-year war on terror, $8 trillion.
It's not my concern.
All right, so that was, again, George Stephanopoulos. Or is his name like Stephanopoulos? I don't know. It's one of those Greek names. Those things have so many syllables. And then Glenn Beck, and then it ended with a little cut of our guy Mike Pence, and that was during his interview with Tucker Carlson. Actually, I think that was the interview that pretty much sealed his fate for the presidential 2024 election. And it was basically when Tucker asked him, well, hey, what's with... in terms of, you're supporting going to war and staying in war in Ukraine so much, what about stuff here in the United States? What about the border crisis, the fentanyl issues, the high inflation, all that? And then literally Pence was like, that's not my concern. Right now, my concern is to keep Ukraine safe. And everybody was just like, did he really just say that out loud? So anyway, again, the reason I want to bring this stuff up is because this military-industrial complex stuff, you've got to have a handle on it. You've got to understand that. And again, I'm going to preface with, I love our military. God bless our troops. I separate the troops from the military, just actually from the military-industrial complex. In the same way I separate doctors from the concept of, medicine being a business. I don't hold the doctors accountable for, let's say, the corruption in big pharma and things like that. So by the same token, I don't hold our troops responsible for the concept of forever wars and, this military industrial complex. But remember, we went in a 20-year war in Iraq and Afghanistan, came out of that in 2021, practically immediately went into a war in the Ukraine. And as of now, it looks like there is, oh my gosh, we're probably over $150 billion. Actually, maybe even more than that, maybe close to $200 billion of funding to Ukraine. And now they're talking about bringing forward another omnibus spending package. And this is pretty interesting. So Mike Big Johnson, the new Speaker of the House, as I played in a previous clip, he's championing, an aid package to Israel along the lines of around $14 billion. And then they're trying to group in, more Ukraine aid. So like another 60 to Ukraine. Actually, if you remember, even President Biden said that in his speech. Hold on, let me see if I can find that. All right, I didn't find the speech, but I found it on CNN.com, and this was, again, October 19th. It says, a request for more funding. The primetime presidential address from the Oval Office took place on the eve of the White House, requesting north of $100 billion from Congress to deliver aid and resources to Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan, and the U.S. border with Mexico, even though the legislative branch is paralyzed by the dysfunction in the House of Representatives. So if you remember, we talked about this, I forget which episode, but, this was when there was all the drama in the House with Kevin McCarthy getting fired on his day off, and then all that stuff was taking place. And then what I think is just so, most people don't even pay attention is they requested $100 billion, additional aid, like almost like a separate package, a separate aid package. And then they group Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan. Again, we have not even talked about Taiwan. Watch, put Taiwan on your radar. I guarantee you in a few months, maybe at the beginning of next year, there's going to be some major flare-ups in Taiwan with China. It's just going to be more gasoline on the fire. And then our southern border, they grouped that all together into that $100 billion aid package. And again, this stuff all kind of ties into this military-industrial complex stuff. This all ties into, following the money, really following the money. And then specifically when it comes to Israel in this current situation, they carved off $14 billion to Israel. By the way, just a little fun fact about Israel. The United States every year gives roughly $6 billion of aid to foreign countries. So $6 billion a year to foreign countries. $3 billion of that goes to Israel. So half of the foreign aid budget every year for the past 50 years has gone to Israel. So if you think about that, let's say $3 billion a year, I don't know if it's been $3 billion every year, but multiply that by 50, that's $150 billion that's gone to Israel, and they're getting the $3 billion every year currently. And now, because of the ongoing, or because of this situation, they're requesting a separate bucket of funding aid package of around $14 billion of them. So actually, let's give this speech from Bernie Sanders a listen. He came out with this on Friday, and actually Bernie's been under a little bit of pressure because he's, AOC and some of the squad team, the Democratic progressives, have been incredibly boisterous in their support of Palestine and, their desire for a ceasefire. So then Bernie finally came out, and this is what he said.
What we are looking at now is one of the more horrific moments in modern history. As you indicated, Hamas attacked Israel in a barbaric way, killed hundreds and hundreds of men, women, and children. Israel has a right to defend itself. I don't think anyone disagrees with that. But what they are doing now in an indiscriminate way, bombing refugee camps, bombing ambulances, killing thousands of innocent men, women, and children in violation of international law is simply not acceptable. It has got to stop. And it is no great secret that the United States provides $3.8 billion every year to Israel. Now they can say they don't want the money, fine. But if they're going to take our money, and Biden wants to give them even more, they have got to recognize that they cannot offend American values, what we stand for, what civilized world stands for. So in my view, and I'm glad that a number of people recently, because I said this like several weeks ago, understand we need a pause right now in the bombing. We need to deal with the horrific humanitarian disaster that you described. I mean, the people have no water, they have no food, they have no fuel, their hospitals have been bombed. It is a total disaster. And we are on the brink of seeing thousands more people die. Hundreds of thousands of people were displaced. Where are they going? Can they return to their homes? Many of them are living in overcrowded conditions in United Nations facilities. And by the way, the UN has lost over 60 relief workers. So we are looking at a humanitarian disaster The United States puts a lot of money into Israel, and our job is to say, yes, you have a right to defend yourself. But Palestinian children are as important as Israeli children, as important as American children. Stop the indiscriminate slaughter of innocent people.
So he even touched on it in that speech. He talked about the fact that, hey, we give Israel $3 billion a year, and if they want to continue to receive that money, or if they're going to continue to take that money, they need to respect American values. And by the way, right now, the death toll, in case you are not following this, the death toll is over 10,000 Palestinians. And then the Israeli death count it's still that same 1,400. It's the same 1,400 that took place on October 7th. And oh my gosh, I can't even believe it. Actually, holy mackerel, this is 1 month. Today's November 7th. So yeah, so in that 1 month time period, you've got 1,400 Israelis, and then we are over 10,000 Palestinians. And so again, why not have a ceasefire? I mean, this is, if you want to talk about an eye for an eye, right now it's an eye for almost 5 eyes. So again, you would think that everyone would be advocating for a ceasefire, but they're just not, and primarily the governments of the United States and Israel are definitely not. That United Nations vote of the 193 countries, 120 of them were calling for a ceasefire. You've got, over the weekend, wow, this was pretty amazing. Obviously, not really anything I can put on a podcast, but if you do follow the Deep Shallow Dive page or my own personal page on Instagram, there's videos of the protests that were going on globally for this ceasefire, and it was pretty amazing. I mean, there were protests probably in over 100 countries around the world, and when you looked at them, man, there were like tens to hundreds of thousands of people out on the streets on Saturday and Sunday calling for a ceasefire. Obviously, they were also, for the most part, very pro-Palestine. So, a lot of Free Palestine banners and flags and all that stuff. But, the message was really about having a ceasefire. And then, like I said, you had Bernie Sanders come out and talk about it. There's been other world leaders. Queen Rania came out again, and there's been others. But the amount of people that took to the streets, I mean, it was pretty incredible. And again, what I find incredible about it the most, or what I find the most incredible part about it, is you're talking about citizens across the globe in a variety of countries, from Belgium to France to Germany to Australia to Pakistan to India to Iraq, all of the African countries. Man, the African countries, those guys are just... They are legit. I've got to find some more clips from some of these profiles I follow on Instagram from these African nations, but they're really, really impressive at the way they articulate their opinions. And, they don't necessarily have a dog in the fight. And so there's a lack of emotion. And when there's a lack of emotion, I truly think you can kind of look at the issue, much clearer. And so, across these African countries, in the United States, in Washington, D.C., there was estimated to be over 100,000 people that showed up on a march on the Capitol on Saturday. It was the largest march or rally in terms of, I guess, an Arab nation cause in the history of the United States. So, when you think about that as a collective, you've got 100 different countries around the world whose people are all, different cultures, different languages, different belief system, different history, different everything, but they all seem to agree on this. And that to me says something, and that to me means something. And that to me, it really does lead to, the concept of the truth. Because again, I find it very hard to believe that, 100 different nations, 100 different cultures, 100 different ethnicities, 100 different groups of people, all with different everything, are all wrong about this? You know what I mean? I don't think so. Anyway, let's jump back into the military industrial stuff. I did find that clip from General Wesley Clark, and I think I had played a snippet of it back in episode, I think it was episode, oh gosh, I forget the number, but it was the episode after 9/11. But give this a listen. This is really good. This will be the final piece in terms of the military industrial complex. But I think he does a really nice job of tying this stuff together. And again, I want you to never lose sight of the fact that war is business. All right, give this a listen.
Right after 9/11, about 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who used to work for me. And one of the generals called me in. He said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, No. He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran." I said, "Is it classified?" He said, "Yes, sir." I said, "Well, don't show it to me."
I am definitely going to try to get that dude on the podcast. Okay, let's see. What else? Couple more things for today, and then we'll wrap it up. I did want to play this Obama clip. This was the other one I referenced at the beginning of this episode. Like I said, can't say I agree with everything Obama says or has done over his presidency or thereafter, but I do like this clip, and I think it makes a lot of sense. So give this a listen.
That what Hamas did was horrific, and there's no justification for it. And what is also true is that the occupation and what's happening to Palestinians is unbearable. And what is true is that there are people right now who are dying who have nothing to do with what Hamas did. If you genuinely want to change this, then you've got to figure out how to speak to somebody on the other side and listen to them and understand what they are talking about and not dismiss it.
You know, what he touched on there, which gosh, this whole situation, I mean, there's so much debate on both sides, but the debate in terms of the occupation, there is no debate on that. There absolutely is an occupation of Gaza and the West Bank. We haven't really talked about the West Bank very much. That's the second suburb, so to speak, of Israel where the Palestinians live. But it's literally called the occupied West Bank. I mean, that's what it's referred to. So, it kind of makes me laugh when people say there is no Israeli occupation of Palestine. And when they say Palestine, they mean Gaza or the West Bank. Especially, let's forget Gaza for a second. The West Bank is literally referred to as the occupied West Bank. So obviously they call it the occupied West Bank for a reason. And by the way, there's no Hamas in the West Bank. So Hamas, the terrorist organization of Hamas, they do not exist in the West Bank. They only exist in Gaza. The West Bank is run by the Palestinian Authority. And then the Palestinian Authority, oh my God, more religion, is run by a religious group called the Fatah. I'm going to explain this in another episode, but basically there's a guy named Mahmoud Abbas, A-B-B-A-S, Abbas, like a boss, but Abbas. And he runs the Palestinian Authority. And then the Palestinian Authority is kind of like the modern day version of the PLO. Anybody in my relative age range might remember the PLO, Yasser Arafat. I will talk about him in an upcoming episode as well. But anyway, all of those guys they're all affiliated with the West Bank, and we really haven't talked anything about the West Bank yet, but I promise we will, and we'll get to understand that a little because there's some incredibly interesting stuff that I found out over the weekend, or actually a good friend of mine sent me a couple amazing articles from the Times of Israel and like the Jerusalem News, which talked about how Netanyahu, who again is the Prime Minister of Israel right now, how Netanyahu basically back in 2018, 2019, 2016 and on, and this is kind of what Mehdi Hassan alluded to in that clip called Blowback, which I played at the end of one of the episodes, but Netanyahu was funding Hamas, believe it or not. He was funding and supporting Hamas in order to counteract the Palestinian Authority, this group that I just talked about run by Mahmoud Abbas. He didn't want the Palestinian Authority, again, which is headquartered in the West Bank, he didn't want them getting too strong and then taking over Gaza and basically creating a united union between the two suburbs. Remember, Gaza is on the left side of Israel. The West Bank is on the right side of Israel. And so Netanyahu, and again, these are legitimate facts. These are straight facts that were actually even printed in Israeli magazines. I'm going to get them, and I actually will try to take some of them and put it into 11 Labs and have one of the voices read it in maybe tomorrow's episode or the day after. But again, remember, Netanyahu was kind of funding the Palestinian movement, the PA, the Palestinian Authority, and so, that all kind of backfired. But again, if you just think about that concept, it just makes you have a million more questions, especially because of the just harsh rhetoric and conversations that are happening now. So I will read those in the next episode. I'll get that information for you. And that's about it for today. I apologize if I didn't seem too chippy, I guess. I am definitely a little bit emotionally drained. I am not going to lie. So with that being said, I found this clip, which is pretty funny. Thought I'd leave with a little bit of humor and levity. Give this a listen. Have a great day, everybody. Call a spade, and we will talk to you soon and get a good laugh. So just so you can visualize this is a guy that's walking by, and then a group of friends asks him, "Hey, do you mind if you take our picture?" So he's like, "Oh, no problem. I'll take your picture." So he grabs their camera or iPhone, and he's basically taking a picture of this group of 6 friends.
I'll just ask this guy. Excuse me, would you mind taking a photo of us?
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody say cheese.
Oh, actually, I'm a vegan. Could you please have us say something else?
Okay, everybody say tofu.
Tofu is actually not as good for you as vegans think. Any CrossFitter will tell you that. It's bad for your testosterone levels.
Okay, I'm sorry. How about we all just smile?
Oh, if one more arsehole asks me to smile.
Not really an arsehole. Taking a photo for you, so...
What's there to smile about anyway?
Okay, would you like me to just count backwards from 3?
Oh, would you like dyslexic people to just not exist?
My cousin has dyslexia, so offended.
Adopted. Don't even know who my cousins are, so more offended.
How about this? We all put a word we're comfortable with in our heads and I'll get the shot.
No, it doesn't sound very inclusive, though, does it? I suppose you'd like us all to stand a few metres apart, would you, Stalin?
Jesus Christ.
Oh, I don't see what religion has to do with this.
Well, I'm an atheist, so majorly triggered.
Is that a comment on the gun debate? Still trying to control people.
But it's not just the people. Has anyone thought about the animals?
Look, this is what we're going to do. Everybody throw up a peace sign and I'll take a photo.
Wow. Cultural appropriation is alive and well. Why don't you just ask us to say kung fu?
Guess what? New plan, group selfie, ready, set, go, boom. And looks awesome. You're going to love it.
Wait.
Nice to meet you.
Oh, you took it with the front camera, you stupid.
This episode was brought to you by Boost Liquid Vitamins. Wake up, take your Boost, start your day. Drink your vitamins, build your immune system with Boost. Available on Boost.com.